crowd, and we have how many? Hi to everybody on Zoom. How many? 19 on Zoom. So Zoom and in person. So welcome and thank you all for joining us today. I'm Catherine Wygant Fawcett, the Executive Director of the Institute for Family-Owned Business, otherwise known as IFOB. So it's great to see everybody. Brooke Stewart is our Director of Communications, and she'll be our tech expert and our online chat monitor. We'll be recording this program for later viewing. We'll send you an email afterwards with all the information and Peter and Teagan's contact information and any resources that we pulled together today. I'd like to thank our sponsors, the Breakwater Group at Morgan Stanley, Maybiz, and our host, Barry Dunn, for this lovely facility. Thank you. As many of you know, the IFOB is a nonprofit that helps family businesses succeed. We offer over 40 programs, and I have, everybody knows my favorite little hierarchy chart here that keeps us all organized with all the things that we do. Many of the educational programs are held right here. And the green programs are open to all employees. It's like Doritos, munch all you want, so we can have everybody here. And if you know people who'd like to learn or be involved, please join us. So this is our second in our 4-part series on how-tos. And we're going to talk about managing problem employees. Has anybody had any problem employees?
Yeah.
No, never happens. Anybody had any culture issues? No? No? Okay, so, well, I guess y'all can go now. So we have Peter Lowe. He's a partner with Brann and Isaacson, and Teagan, the founder of Mariner HR, and she's also one of our facilitators for our Next Gen program. We have a couple board members here. If you want to raise your hands, thank you all. Oh, we have a good turnout. Thank you all. We'll take a break for the summer, although we really won't, because on June 23rd, we have our National Family-Owned Business Day. Did anybody know that that was the national holiday? I didn't know either. So Linda Barrell told us, and I sent around to all the family business centers around the country, and they didn't know either. So we said, well, let's celebrate. So if you have kids, we have done programs in the past where you could bring your kids. We're going to go to William Allen Farm in Pownell. It's New Brunswick and Freeport. It's a 200-year-old barn. We're going to be there from 5 to 7. We will take a break for the how-tos. Our next one will be on marketing and protecting your family-owned business in the brave new world, name, image, and likeness. And then we will have on, anybody heard of our awards? Anybody been an award recipient? Raise your hands. Don't be shy. So this is our awards that we put on out front. We have out front we have a nomination flyer. So nominations are open now. If you know any family businesses, please nominate them. They'll know that you recognize them for their excellence. And if they're not members and they fill out the application, they will get a free membership for the rest of the year. And regardless if anybody fills out the application, they will get 2 free tickets to the awards night. And last year we had 450 people. We were at Thompson Point and celebrated 30 years. And we brought in the Michael Jackson thriller Zombie Monsters. So that was fun. So we have Nielsen Macy Vanilla coming. They're a 3rd-generation family business from outside of Chicago. It's very high-end vanilla extracts. 3rd-generation gentleman's coming. And for the first time that I've been here, and it's been 11 years, we're going to have a private luncheon with him with anybody who wants to come the next day. So you can get more in-depth information and learn about the 3 circles that we have here that Maddie Corson did for us. So we also have peer groups. We have Laura McDowell here, who does our EOS think tank. So if anybody's doing EOS, we have that. We have Brooke here with the working parents. We have CEOs. We work with women in family business. So we have a lot of other peer groups as well. So now our special offer, because we don't do enough. We thought we'd do some more things. So we just put in special offers because everybody always wants to reach out to our audience. So we have to walk a delicate balance because we don't want family businesses to be hounded, but we know that people have offers and they want to do commerce. So we just put that on the website. So we have some great special offers. One of them is with merch, Regatta Merch, and they just did my shirt. So, so they have lovely things. And if anybody wants those, any member can put it on there and it's open to the public. We have job listings, we have our chit chat with Derek and Kat. And we just put out a scholarship for high school kids. Shaylee helped us with that and some others. And guess how many nominations we got, applications?
There's at least 20.
We got 40.
Wow.
So we did it really quickly. It's for anybody in high school who's going on a 2-year, 4-year, or a trade show, and it covers the whole state and people who've been hearing about it. We only have one unless everybody helps us donate some more money for them. It's $2,500 up to 4 years. So Brooks figured out how to cleverly figure out how to screen those. So we'll do that. At the end of the program, I have some door prizes for us, and we have a survey that you see on the table that we'd appreciate your help. With that long opening, I will turn it to Peter. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Catherine, Brooke. I just wanted to also thank the board for, Peter and I had submitted our proposals a while ago now. We're so appreciative of you guys bringing us together. We had both kind of proposed similar topics, and it's been really fun to put it together and share with you today. Just a quick intro, what we're going to talk about today. We'll do some introductions, set the stage, and Peter and I are basically going to be your MapQuest, Rand McNally, Google Maps, whatever generational map you use. But when we were talking about accountability, we really, and performance management, the theme of a fork in the road kept coming up. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. I just thought it really made a lot of sense. I will do some culture stuff, and then Peter will do the real nitty gritty, which is probably why you actually signed up. I'm just here to blow your mind. Quick introductions. Thank you so much, Catherine, for the warm welcome. My name is Teagan. I am the founder of Mariner HR and Business Consultants. I'm located in Southern Maine, but I service clients nationwide. I was, much like Peter, I was a former labor and employment attorney in Southern California for 10 years before having kids really just broke me as a human. No, I'm kidding, kind of. Before my husband and COVID came, third baby came, and I just realized I was constantly fixing the same problems for my client, and I was for my clients, and I was ready to do the next thing. So I went in-house as a head of HR at a brewery, a family-owned brewery here in Portland. I did that for a few years, scaled the organization to double its size across multiple locations. And then it was time to scale back again because 3 kids broke me. And I started my own firm where I work with organizations to develop high-performing teams and healthy workplace culture. So that's a little bit about me. To Peter to introduce himself.
Sure. Thanks very much. So when I put in the proposal, it was how to fire employees, I think was my title. And then, thankfully I got HR help, and it sounds a lot better now. I was reined in, so it's going to be on my epitaph as a lawyer. He knew how to fire people successfully. But on a serious note, and we'll get to it, there's a time and place, and it's no one wants it, but the one time as a lawyer, no one thanks you as a lawyer generally, and they usually call you up and they say, I don't want to talk to you, and they're immediately thinking about the meter running and the fact that they've got to call you about a problem. They're never going to call up and say, I'd love to give Dave a raise. Is that okay?
I get those calls.
You get those calls. But the one time I frankly hear back from a client is when we've spent sometimes weeks, sometimes months, navigating the problem employee, the person who is dragging the office, the business, the plant, whatever it is, down. And they've looked at it as an intractable problem. We'll get more into that. And we've got a solution at the end. And sometimes Teagan may be able to turn it around, but if it can't be turned around, the exit. And I will get that call, which says, we can't believe how different it is. We actually didn't know the impact it was having truly. And the feedback we've got from from others. So anyway, that was the justification for me having that terribly blunt title. Then I was reined in. I've worked in this area of counseling employers for longer than I care to admit. Here in Maine, with Brann and Isaacson, we're in Lewiston and we're in Portland. And the beauty of practicing in Maine is we have so many family businesses. And if I really look at the businesses that I represent, the majority of them are family owned or were originally family owned. And it ranges from kind of a well-known family business in Freeport, Colorado Bean, and to some startups where it's, a husband and wife creating something and we get involved in that. And you know what? The issues are quite similar. You can have, a wonderful big corporation like Bean or a very wonderful new fledgling business, and these same issues arise. So thank you, Catherine and Brooke, for having us. And as we go today, I know Teagan and I both enjoyed having some interaction, questions. We've got folks on Zoom, but I think we'd welcome it as we go, because I'm sure you have maybe some stories to tell, or at least some concerns or some questions, and that would be great as well. That's good with you, Teagan.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're lawyers. We're good at stopping mid-sentence and turning on a dime. Those of you on Zoom, I will add, go ahead and just drop any questions into the chat, and Brooke will take them and read them. And those of you in the room, just make sure if you could just keep your voice up so that folks on Zoom can hear. But absolutely, don't wait, don't suffer in silence. That's actually the whole theme of today anyway. So don't wait till you've missed the fork in the road to ask your question.
And as we're lawyers, we will make up an answer even if we don't know the answer.
I don't do that. I wanted to set the table and talk about accountability, because when we were talking about doing this presentation, when bringing our different approaches, there was this theme that kept coming up, the fork in the road, the roadway. And a lot of you probably, if you were interested in this program today, it was probably because maybe you missed the fork in the road and we're at the dead end, right? Sometimes we get to a point with an employee where you have to call Peter, or they sue you and then you have to call Peter. But when we really peel it back, and those of us who are kind of on the back end of employee relations, it's an employee's time with you, whether they're inherited, whether they're family, whether they're new, it's a path. And there are signposts, or so to speak, along the way. And what happens with performance management is sometimes we miss those signposts. We miss the opportunities, whether it's we don't say something, we're not recognizing it, we're afraid to say something, and then we're left with not many decisions. The decisions are made for themselves. But when we think about performance management, we're missing, a lot of people come to me and they say, oh, I'm having trouble with performance management. And I ask a bunch of questions about your organization chart, or I ask a lot of questions about communication and feedback. And then they're kind of like, well, but the employee is not performing. Well, you might actually have an accountability problem. And so what I want to do is I want to parse out accountability from performance management. Peter's has you covered on performance management. He's going to go over some things in a little bit, but I wanted to start with the real foundation of managing employees, which is accountability. A lot of people say accountability is really just their responsibility for handling a task. But I would suggest to you that is not it at all. And the most effective leaders that create a culture of accountability are ones who, on their journey of employment, not only are they recognizing the signposts as they're reaching them and making the right decision to manage their employee, they're actually anticipating them or getting ahead of them so that they have a multitude of tools to manage the employee before things get bad. So that's what I want to start out with, is I want to peel it back. And I want to suggest to you that accountability, like I said, it's not task focused, it's outcome focused. Properly defining accountability is understanding that it is actually the team and your own relationship with the outcome. not the widgets that you make or the boxes that you check. Have any of you seen Office Space, which I think is how I ended up in my career?
Yes.
I am a Bob. I hate to say it. My husband's always like, I hope your firings go really well. But so there's a scene where Peter is in the room telling the Bobs, Peter's this, frontline employee, and he says, the thing is, Bob, if I, move a few more units, if Initech moves a few more units, I don't see he says, I don't see another dime. And he said, that only gets a man to work so hard so he doesn't get fired. Right? That's task management. Our boy up here on the screen, Bill Lumberg, Peter's manager, the one who's constantly checking on progress, limiting Peter's decision-making, asking about the TPS reports. That's task management, dare I say micromanagement. But what Peter's really trying to tell us in that moment, not this Peter, other Peter, is that there was no relationship with the outcome. If someone's relationship with their outcome is just whether or not their TPS report is correct, whether or not they sell a certain amount of units, whether or not they implement whatever system, that only gets a person to work so hard. However, when we switch to a culture of accountability, we start to think about our relationship with the outcome, and you start to care a little bit more, because then it's also your relationship with your coworkers, right? It's not about whether or not we sell a certain amount, it's whether or not our brand has a certain level of gravitas or quality, or whether or not the patients or customers we serve are having a certain experience. That is when we start to move into accountability. That is when people do the job, not because they want to check the box, but because they care about the end user's relationship with your product, your service, your organization. And that is where people start to manage themselves, and we have less performance management conversations, because people tend to care about the work, not because you're breathing down their neck telling them they should care about their work. They're caring about the work because they care. They care, I represent Hardy Pond Construction. I represent Proposa Flooring. That is very different than I'm here to sell some floor. You know what I mean? And so our boy Ron Swanson here, if you've ever seen Parks and Recreation, great example of an accountability leader. Super hands off, right? If you've ever seen the show, he hides in his office most of the time. His employees are eccentric. They're outlandish. They have different personalities. He lets them do their thing, and they actually have this wonderful, rich, vibrant culture. They manage themselves, and he actually just gets to kind of hide in his office. I'm not recommending you hide in your office. I'm just saying the team manages itself, and that is great because he can focus on other things. If you are focusing on the day-to-day performance of tasks, you are losing opportunities. And also you're really building a wall between your employee and their connection with the overall outcome. And I know that sounds so simple, right? I've made it so easy, right? Now you just go and you tell your team, no, don't care about the task, care about the outcome. And then it's not that easy. But I wanted to tell you the story before I have Peter jump in about Paul. Who is Paul? Paul, this is a wonderful story. And it shows how when we switch from performance management, when we kind of back it up down the road to creating a culture of accountability, how your time gets freed up as leaders. So Joseph Grenny is this author. He writes for the Harvard Business Review. He's an organizational consultant and expert. And many, many years ago, he was tasked with going to this big corporation, interviewing the CEO and seeing why they were so successful. So this is back before Zoom. He's, emailing back and forth with Paul, the CEO. Can't wait to meet him. He's going to go up to, I think it was Seattle. He's like, I'm going to go up there. I'm going to meet him. I'm going to meet the team. It's going to be great. So Joseph gets on the plane. He goes. He's kind of ushered. Oh, great. We have a 10 o'clock meeting starting. Why don't you just come right in? He comes in. He sees someone sitting at the table. Smiles at him. He nods like, okay. Someone shows up at 10:04, and someone sitting at the table says to the person who walks in at 10:04. Hey, the meeting was supposed to start at 10. I thought we all agreed. What happened? And Joseph was like, whoa, we're starting out with it. And the person, I'm sorry, you're right. No argument, no, just, yep, I'll do better. And then this accountant stands up, she starts giving the numbers aren't really great that quarter. And, and Joseph's looking over at the guy at the head of the table, kind of winking like, hey, Paul, like we'll connect later. And everyone at the table, for the most part, there's, a couple people, there's a quiet person in the back, but they're peppering her with questions. Why? Not needling her, but definitely pushing. Why aren't our numbers good? Truly holding her accountable for her outcomes. And he's like, man, this is a tough group here. But the conversation goes well. And at the end of it, he starts to, at the end of the meeting, he starts to go over to the guy at the head of the table. And the person who wasn't kind of saying anything grabs Joseph and says like, oh, hi, I'm Paul. Nice to meet you. And Joseph is shocked. The guy, the CEO, was the person saying nothing. The person at the head of the table, the people running the meeting were actually the management team, and Paul was just sitting back. And Joseph was horribly embarrassed. He's like, who have I been winking at this whole time? He must think there's something wrong with me. But he recognized, through the course of spending time with this organization that in the weakest teams, there is no accountability. Right? You just show up at 10:04, it's no big deal. In mediocre teams, bosses are the source of accountability. So Paul would have been running that meeting. But in the highest performing teams, the ones that require less and less phone calls to Peter over here, peers are managing the vast majority of performance within the organization amongst each other, which frees our boy Paul up to be doing other things, right? Focusing on strategy. It also means that performance issues are nipped in the bud before they ever become an issue that senior management has to deal with. So I would posit that you can manage your employees' tasks all day. That requires two people to do one job. If you can switch your mindset to start thinking about outcomes and letting your middle management team kind of lead that charge, you may find that you see less performance issues come your way. But sometimes you get a fork in the road, right?
Sure. Yeah, let me share with you. Well, I'll tell you how I often come into the picture. I get the call. It is a call. Sometimes the Zoom is set up in today's world. And often at that point, the client, HR person, manager, owner of the company, they're a little bit at the end of their tether. And frequently they are in a place where they want to go to termination, and we'll back up in a minute about evaluation and accountability. And although I said at the beginning a little bit flip of how to fire people, my first task is let's try and figure what's going on. Some of the clients I work with for years, I know the characters, the personalities. Some of them I don't. And often, especially if it's a bigger employer, I don't know the person we're talking about, which in fact can have a benefit because I don't have a dog in the fight. I don't have a bias. I'm neutral. I'm a passionate advocate for my client, but I don't have an opinion about this person. And I had one just within the last month where, I was called in and I'm going to be very anonymous here, but the senior person was all set to terminate this employee. And you've got to be able to read people. I mean, what we do, you got to be able to read people. And I was part of conversations with other people, HR, in the conversation. And there was a passion to this person's desire to end employment. And my role is to meet the needs of my client, which is to promote the best interests of the business. And I'm not going to get into the multiple layers, but that particular example ended up with the manager losing his job, not the employee. And I gleaned, and I'm not great rocket scientist, that something was amiss. It resulted in an investigation. So one thing I always say to people is, have an open mind. And I'm frequently looking at, so what is the root cause here? And that was an exceptional outcome. Doesn't happen that often, but it is always, I have to always remind myself, yeah, I represent management. That's who I do. That's the choice I've always made. And I think it's hard for a lawyer to bridge and do both. But I always want to approach it with as fair, open mind as possible and give the advice to the client. Let the client, I never make the decisions. The client makes the decisions, but they need to be informed. So I wanted to share that. So you kind of understood that perspective. When I get the call, and it's back to the evaluations and the fork in the road, the client has often made the decision, like, but they don't know how to execute it. You use the term afraid, they're afraid to execute it. In the world we live in, it is a litigious world. Now, it's a small number of matters that end with a claim, but they do. And if any of you have been in that place, it's horrible. It's not a place where you want to go. It's horrible because it's expensive, it's time consuming, it's emotional, it consumes your energy. It's a place to avoid if you can. The only people, I've said this every time I present, who benefit are the lawyers, because it's extraordinarily expensive, hundreds of thousands of dollars for one employee case. So stay away if you can. But the flip side of that is a client hearing from a lawyer like, oh my God, you're going to get sued. It's risky. It's terrible. You think, then I've got to have this person forever. What, life tenure? I know they're not performing. I know they're dragging us down, but they've got to think they've got a disability. They're over 60. You know, I can check like 5 boxes of protected classes. So, you know, I feel that exasperation and, you know, frankly, I don't think we can do anything. And I disagree. And I think there's a roadmap to do it. On the evaluation part, you know, and then get to the fork in the road. I'm no expert on doing evaluations. I'm not an HR professional. I've seen many. I've done some. But what I want to glean when you call me is that there's a one fundamental notion. It sounds so simplistic, but will this be fair? Will this outcome be fair? Because believe me, if the employee believes it's not fair, that's when they'll go and seek advice. Good for them, they should. And that's when you may get a request for the personnel file and the reasons for termination, and we're off to the races. So one fundamental part of fairness is an evaluation. So if I don't know or have not been told that I'm like the worst character in the office, that I'm toxic, that I'm dragging everybody down, nobody wants to spend time with me because no one wants to say that to the person, then, you know, there is a fairness notion that the person may absolutely be the wrong employee for the workplace, but have they been told that? So I've had so many situations over my career where, yeah, they've been like this forever. They've actually been with us for 25 years. My dad wouldn't get rid of them, but now I'm in charge and we've got to do it. It's a new culture and we're going to do it. And yeah, I mean, they've always been like that. And I say, oh, wonderful. You wouldn't mind sending me the file, would you? The personnel file. Like, great. And there's 2 things sometimes.
If they have it.
One is, yeah, there's no file. Or, well, we didn't get to do evaluations for a few years, so there's no evaluations. Or, yeah, here's the evaluations, yeah, and I read them, I was like, this employee sounds great.
Stellar employee.
Wow.
5 out of 5.
And like you read, no, we put something in about their attitude. It's like, yeah, on, you know, the 3rd page hidden away, there's something about, and room for improvement would be just being a little bit more collegial. Like, and this person's just toxic. So I'm not criticizing anyone because I think many of us, myself included, you know, you're giving someone an evaluation, you are looking, you know, you don't want to hurt their feelings. You don't want to be too blunt. But, you know, when I'm looking at the lens later, I think, gosh, you know, one fundamental part of fairness is giving them that feedback. And as the lawyer, I want to be able to, you essentially check that box. So I'm always looking ahead to say, the lens I have to look at is, so if this doesn't go well, if they do go and file a claim with the Maine Human Rights Commission or somewhere else, how will it appear? Because probably you all know this already. It's not the Fairness Commission. It's not like, was this a fair decision? Was it based on discrimination and legally protected classes, age, gender, all of those things. But if it doesn't look, doesn't feel, doesn't smell fair, you're going to have a harder time, because investigators, judges, others, they're going to be influenced by that. So if they look at something and say, "Well, gosh, this is just so harsh and unfair," you're going to have an issue. So I'm always looking at it from that lens. And then the last thing, and we'll tee up the fork in the road, is when I talk to you, I'm going to often say, is this a skill or is this a will issue? Is this because that will inform kind of the direction you may well take.
Absolutely.
Because if the person doesn't have the skill to do the job, if it was just a bad fit, it was never meant to be, even though they've been in it a long time. Sometimes I'm a realist and think they're not going to succeed
Without interventions.
Yeah, without interventions. And they may well, even with a great performance improvement plan and other things, which still may be good, I kind of know where this script is going to end. And then you may be thinking, well, is there something else they could do? Or if it's will, well, you'll help fix that, won't you? But
No, that's an accountability issue.
Exactly.
The will's the issue.
So the conversation I'll have is, all right, this is this fork in the road, and are you going to go down the road of this really should end, and how do we do that, and what's the best way? Or is there an alternative, and talk about some of those alternatives? I think though, it's again comes to a fairness option, because sometimes in this fork in the road, you may well say, to the employee, and maybe, with some good coaching, we are at a fork in the road, and this is what it would look like going one of two ways. And when you give employees some skin in the game, some choice, then it can be a better outcome too. So I've worked with many clients where I've said, have that conversation and say to them, this, it might end this way, it might end that way, while you're still kind of in control. What do you think? Where do you want to go? And of course, as the lawyer, I'm thinking in many of those situations, if they could agree that this isn't best for me, we could agree on some modest package, we could call it a resignation, we could move on. That's a problem solved. And not usually as easy as that, but
Sometimes.
anyway.
Yeah, I actually had that exact example, so I'm happy to share. And that was something that we had talked about, the skill versus will, Peter. It's just, that's it, right? That's performance versus accountability. We, at the brewery I was at, were growing exponentially, and it was same employees who've been there since day one, family controlled, and we were about to undergo a massive expansion that would double the tap room staff. We're adding a kitchen, doubling, just the role of the tap room manager was going to change from just pouring beers to like running a restaurant. And the tap room manager had been there forever. Awesome human being, just still a good friend to this day. Really, really good person. And we were hitting the fork in the road, and we were seeing it coming. We were seeing as the expansion was like starting to get built, and as we're starting to grow, and his performance was it was always trending up, but we were starting to plateau. And the team's performance was starting to plateau. And, you know, we had kind of done some performance conversations, had a culture of feedback, which I'm going to talk about. So these were open conversations we were having along the way where, hey, we're not seeing what we need to be seeing right now. And we got to a point where we had the skill versus the will conversation. And honestly, we were very lucky. The taproom manager felt comfortable enough coming to us and saying, this is not necessary. He's like, I see the fork in the road. I see that I've got, you know, the performance issue. I don't think I have the skills to, you know, level up to this level of management, doubling my team, changing our business model. I don't have those skills. He's like, I know you would invest in me and you would get me those skills or get me, you know, what I need. He's like, so then I asked myself, do I have the will? And he was like, I don't. And the great news was he did this, could have done a little bit sooner, but with enough time because we had been having regular accountability conversations and really checking in on not just can you do the job, but like, how are you feeling about like what we do here for him to say, I can't do this anymore. And we did, we used all of our resources, which I'll talk about in a minute, to see if we could save the employment. This is a valued employee, but because we recognized these things coming before it was too late, before we opened the doors to, you know, double the footprint and a brand new POS and all these new things, we were able to give him a wonderful package that allowed him to spend an entire season with his family, medical care. He helped us transition the new person that came in. He was heavily involved in the hiring process, which then also helped the accountability of the next person coming in. They had trust because, the original beloved taproom manager had a hand in hiring, and it was such a win. Whereas if we hadn't have been able to have those conversations, and I'm going to talk about how you create that culture, but if we hadn't been able to have those conversations, we were heading towards termination. And we're so grateful this person wasn't surprised, and to this day still has a wonderful relationship with the brand and with the organization, and it could have ended very differently. So Peter's absolutely right. Don't wait to have those conversations. Don't wait to manage the performance. If you can have the problematic employee be a part of the solution, especially if that means, I actually don't want to work here anymore, it's such a win. So I wanted to talk with you about, I'd like my slides to work, but they're not going to. That's okay.
There you go.
Here we go. I wanted to talk with you about what it takes to create that environment where the employee actually comes to you, or where you can parse out, this is like, whether it's a skill issue, whether it's a will issue. The key requirements in an accountability environment are trust, communication, transparency, and timing. And I know this sounds like lip service, but I'm telling you, I've been in the game a long time. I might be older than I look. This is true. This is not lip service. There are studies to bear this out. I have deposed thousands of employees over the years, and I'm telling you, this is why they come and bring a lawsuit, is if these things are missing. So when we think about building trust in an accountability and performance management environment, it has to start at the top. I am not a believer that like trust and respect as a leader is earned, is given freely. I like to end whenever I'm putting somebody on a PIP, on a performance plan, I like to end with like that olive branch of trust. I know you're going to nail these things. I know that when we sit down in 30 days, in 90 days, we're going to be celebrating your success. I want them to know that I trust them. Do you think I always feel that way? No, there are times where I know going into the PIP, I'm like, ooh, it's not looking good. Like if I was, on Sports Center and I'm, play by play, I'm like, let's see if he can do it, Peter. But they don't need to know that. They need to know that I trust them. They need to know that I care about the outcome. And in this situation, the outcome is their employment. They need to know that it's not about me managing their TPS report. It's about the system working the way it should, right? And I understand their role in that. And communication is such a huge part of that.
Can I just add one thing on the
Yeah.
PIP? No,
Yes.
Because and this would be an interesting talking point. So I get these conversations about a PIP and exactly that issue, and I will ask, some performance improvement plan, but And from a legal point of view, I love them.
Gotta have 'em.
You have to do them and managing them.
You can't just.
Probably awful, but I love them because it's exhibit B. Yeah, we put them on a paper, but I'm a realist again. And so if I like, is this just going to be a complete exercise in futility? Is this going to be, one where it's simply papering the trail and the employee believes that too? Because then if that's the case, then the employee doesn't have trust. Like, I know exactly what's happened. They want to, they haven't done anything. They want something in their file. They're going to fire me anyway. And so I will have that conversation with folks and say, is there any hope? Because if there is no hope, then it might be the fork in the road conversation before the PIP. So, that's always a sort of a balancing act, because if there is no hope, then the PIP is not authentic. And, we could spend hours talking about documentation, and, you've had lawyers endlessly say, document. And, but sometimes, we even see the documentation that goes south with the PIP. My other quick comment on this is the PIP is a contract, really. It's something where you commit with the employee to be in partnership. And I've seen too often, it's a checklist. It's like fail, see you next week. And then sometimes I'm too busy to see you next week, so we missed a week. And then at the end of 60 days, 90 days, they say, hey, Peter, call you again. Remember that person? I don't remember them. It's all a blur these days. But I soon refresh my memory and they say, are we good to go? And I look at it and said, you're gonna let that person go because you say they didn't meet their side of the bargain in the PIP. Try and say it tactfully, but you didn't either. So it is, it's accountability on both sides. So you move forward in good faith. You're in a position to say, we did what we said we would. We went through this exercise. Here's the fair conclusion. So anyway.
Yeah, no, it tees me up perfectly, because I absolutely, accountability, trust, respect, those are all things, it's a mutual contract. It has to be, right? And when we think about performance plans, and when we think about what we want to ask of others, we owe role clarity. We owe absolute clarity, because it's one thing to say, I played rugby for a long time. I was fortunate enough to play at some high levels, and I had a coach once who ironically is now she won the bronze medal as the coach with the women's sevens team. She's gotten better, let's say that. She had been a teammate of mine in Boston. But this was her first year coaching, and I was still playing, and she had stopped playing, and she was like, just do better. And I was like, Emily, how would you like I have some ideas, but I'm 5'2", you're 5'10", like we have different playing styles. How would you like me to do better, right? Do better is not a strategy, right? Giving someone a PIP that's fake, or even just do better, that's not a strategy. You're setting yourself up for failure. In an accountability environment, do better looks like, I'd like to see you in the office at 8 a.m. every day. Or I'd like these reports to be in, not just by Friday, I'd like them to be in at noon by Friday. But you're not going to stop there, because you want to be really clear. I need them by Friday at noon because I need time with them so that I can review them, make any changes, get it off to the next person. Or I need the PO by, 4 o'clock on Thursday because the distributor's orders are going to go out at noon on Friday, and I need time to make sure they're correct, to go to the distributor, things like that. You're not just telling them what you need. That's part of it, being hyper specific. You're also connecting that task with the outcome. I need it because that also shows your accountability to them. That shows what your job is. My job is not Bill Lumberg. My job is not to, do you have a question, Joe? Hit me with it.
So I want just the Q&A. How do you what you're explaining now, how do you balance that with micromanaging, perceiving?
Absolutely. So
Sorry, a little louder.
how do you balance role clarity with micromanagement? That is timing, right? Yeah. We don't want to be Bill Lumberg, right? Checking in. Oh, we don't want to be leaning over their desk. That's why you want to get as specific as you can. This is what I need. this is when I need it. You can also even add, this is when I'm going to check in with you. If you need something before that, here's your resources. And the next step, and we get real, I mean, I get really into like delegation, that's a separate thing, but also then you have to clear their path. If everyone needs to know that you're giving someone authority to do something, don't leave them to tell, because then it's gonna be a whole thing. Say, hey, everyone, I'm just letting you know that I'm giving Joe authority to get this done. He needs to get it done by this time. If you have any questions, go to him, right? Or if you need something, let me know. It's a ton of communication. And it's also checking ourselves and knowing sometimes we are going to be let down. And then the conversation is gonna start again. That's where creating a culture of feedback comes into play. So instead of micromanagement, we're gonna give feedback. Does that make sense? I'll talk about feedback too, because it's part of it. Feedback, if when we're thinking about accountability and performance management, we only give feedback when things are bad. How well do we think that those conversations are gonna go? How are our employees gonna feel when you darken their door or when you pop up in their inbox? If it's only ever you didn't do this well. Not good.
Can I just add one thing?
Yes,
there? Well,
please,
it's
don't
there.
ask.
Well, that's how my mind works, and I'll come back to, I'll come back to it in a minute. I have, in my evaluation, it should say he goes off on tangents, like, whoa, I've done some presentations with Dave.
Love it.
He allows me one. So I'm gonna give you an interesting fact. Actually, this wasn't gonna be the interruption, but this is what it is.
Let's roll.
Rugby. So rugby was invented by a rule breaker. So surely there's some relevance to this. Can I squeeze some relevance? So William Webb Ellis in 1823, sounds so bizarre, but what he did, it was with a fine disregard for the rules of football. First took the ball in his hands and ran. So football was played in England, and it was like 100 people on a field. And they were all running around, kicking it and jumping on top of each other, but you couldn't handle it. And he put it in his hands one day and ran with it. And you have some sort of American football game now, I think, which is probably in our derivation. But that all happened at rugby school, which is the school I attended. So, and we would walk by every day and there's this plaque which said, with the fine disregard for the rules. And we're like, good for him. He's our most famous guy. And he was being recognized for a fine disregard of the rules. That has absolutely nothing to do, but.
Oh my God, it does. I'm actually gonna talk about Bill Belichick.
Oh, okay.
Let's go.
But I did have one point, which was when I see the PIP or I see the evaluation and people are like, oh, and their mindset is this isn't gonna work out. So it's everything that's bad. And I will say, did they do something well during the PIP period? Oh, on this particular competency, actually, they kind of improved. And I say it. It doesn't mean that they're going to be successful, but that just has more authenticity. You're not like signing on for life tenure because you said, by the way, you started to show up for work, because that was a problem before. Like, well done. You're here on time every day. That's great. Everything else sucks, but so recognize something if it is worthy of recognition. It has, the person who's looking at it later will be looking at this, investigator or whatever, say, were they just out to like nail this person through their documentation, or were they being kind of even-handed and fair, and I get where it ended. So anyway, that's
100%.
was I don't know how rugby came in there, but
You teed me right up.
Do I have one more, Dave, or am I done?
I'm about to hand it over to you on road 2. So we're on road 1 now. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah.
So what you're saying from a legal perspective, papering it with a measure of objectivity gives it more credibility in a later process before it's a deposition or some sort of chronology.
It's so true, so true.
Sorry to get into litigation.
No, 100%. We're about to anyway.
It's really good because,
Big time.
this is where I said, we all tell you to document. And then if it's documented with a lens of, I'm going to document every single thing this person ever does wrong, And I'm reading it, I was like, oh my God, the person went to the bathroom and they stayed there 7 minutes versus 5 minutes. And we
You're
lost.
trying to nail that guy.
You're trying to nail that guy. And you can't hide those documents when there's a claim. Every single thing you've ever created practically
Comes out.
comes out. So if someone looks at it later and says, this poor soul, it was like under constant surveillance and scrutiny, you know, I took my lawyer's advice and I documented. It's like, no, I didn't mean that. So, yeah, that's a great way to summarize it.
Yeah, and I think if the documentation is not objective, it also undermines the credibility of the manager or the leadership. Because it's like, wait a minute, now I'm asking you questions and I'm gonna get you to admit that like they did show up to work on time sometimes, they did do some good work. So then I'm gonna be like, are you lying then or are you lying now? I mean, I'm not gonna ask it like that, but I'm gonna set it up like that. And then the person who was fired, who has the most to lose, is going to look like the more credible person. Yeah, every now and then I use my powers for good. But yeah, feedback is so important. And the reason why positive feedback is just as important is when we think about accountability, we think about our relationship with the outcome. We think about all the good things we do, right? Because we want to encourage those, right? Like I can tell my kids a million times, like that their room is a mess and they're not going to hear me. But when I say, wow, when you cleaned up your room, it was incredible. They'll never forget it, right? And there's actually a psychological reason for that. We could get into the neuroscience of it all, but it takes like 7 like corrections or insults to equal like 1 positive. We just, it means more in the work context. In real life, it's the opposite, but in the work context, that positive thing stays with folks. And so having that feedback all the time, that opens the door to what was happening with our guy, Joseph Grenny and Paul. People felt comfortable bringing anything up, not just performance issues. When you only ever are commenting on performance, then that's what people kind of are afraid of. They're also then afraid to speak up if they've got a good idea or if they have a problem. But if you want folks to take ownership of their own performance, you need to give them avenues to have those conversations and feel psychologically safe to do so. And the best way to start doing that is having regular communication, not just at your annual reviews, not just a quick email when someone does a good job, but actual regular one-on-ones, multiple opportunities. At the brewery I worked at, I was very adamant that at least once a month, in some way, shape, or form, employees had a way to communicate with the brewery. We did management one-on-ones, we did annual reviews, we did Maine's best places to work, we did an employee engagement survey. They were peppered throughout the year so that there were different ways, in person, anonymous, in writing, to your manager, not to your manager. There was a million ways for employees to give their feedback so that when we had feedback to give, didn't make them feel uncomfortable. Oh, I meet with James every Tuesday. So I'm not surprised when James sits down with me and has feedback for me because it's Tuesday and I spend time with James on Tuesday. That feels really different and we feel a lot better about receiving that feedback than we do if it's like, oh God, I got called into the conference room. Dang it. I just one more thing because you want the nitty gritty from Peter. But talking about football, American Gridiron. Best example of how performance management and accountability go together. Because a lot of people like Joe was saying, well, how do you navigate the balancing, like the touchy-feely culture stuff with the, like, you need to do your job. The Belichick era Patriots is the best example. His mantra was literally, do your job. But role clarity was a huge part of it. And if you want to go beyond that, if you want to read Power of Habit and you want to talk about Tony Dungy and the Tampa Bay Bucks and how John Gruden comes in and takes the credit for all that work, we can talk. I'll stay after. Because Tony Dungy posited the same thing. He suggested that each individual should be so focused on just doing their own job. But it didn't stop there. Do your job, trust the person next to you to do their job, trust your leadership and your management to do their job and make the right decisions, putting it all together, and understand that it's part of a bigger picture. That's where I think we get lost with performance management, even on a PIP. We just want to control you, right? Have you ever been mad at like your kid or like an employee and you're just like, I just want you to do what I want you to do. Yeah, well, it's not really about that, right? It's about, I want you to be the human I want you to be. I want my company to operate a certain way. I don't want to have these phone calls again. I don't want to have these conversations again. So we have to remind ourselves of that. So ultimately, it is about doing your job, right? It is about the performance management, but it's about understanding how it works with what everyone else is doing, about why we're doing those things, about why it's important, about, the fact that, okay, well, if the center, muffs the, handing it off to the quarterback, well, then everybody gets hit. We lose the ball. We maybe lose the game. That's really different than, hey, just don't drop the ball, right? You feel different. You feel a sense of responsibility to the outcome just by focusing on your job. So that's really kind of what I wanted to end this whole culture, touchy-feely, this is doable for you guys. And it's okay if you're working backwards. It's okay if you shot past the fork in the road and you're like, how do I roll this back, right? You start with the roll. What's the task I want you to do? Why do I want you to do it? Are you doing it? Are you not? Why? What do you need? You can reverse engineer it if you have to, right? I understand that most of you aren't starting from scratch and you're like, you didn't just fire everyone and you got a new team and you got new management. It's not how it works. You're going to peel it back. But if you really think about our Dark Lord, Bill Belichick. The proof was in the pudding, right? As much as, it was. They won a lot of Super Bowls because everyone focused on their job, but it was clear what they had to do. It was clear what would happen if they didn't. I think we all know what happens if you don't operate in the Belichick system. It was very clear what would happen if they didn't, and they understood the bigger picture. So when I talk about accountability, that's really what I'm talking about. And I know this is all well and good, but I am sure that you have people right now that you've got some things on fire. I will just say, actually, this is a resource for you. It's in the slides. I should have mentioned this. To recognize the fork in the road before you call Peter and make a decision, you actually need to figure out where you are. This is on you as leaders. Are we I'm a big fan of this accountability ladder. Are we at blaming others or making excuses? Are we at waiting and hoping? How many of you feel like you might just be at waiting and hoping with a problematic employee? Maybe they'll get better. Or how about this one? Maybe they'll just quit. Maybe they'll find another job. Yeah, I want to kick it over to Peter now, so you can talk about acknowledging reality. Here is where we're at. We're at the fork in the road.
Yeah.
We're gonna own it. And we're gonna find a solution, even if that means, even if they haven't figured it out, they gotta go.
Yeah, well, maybe they'll just quit, usually comes up in the conversation.
Always.
And it sometimes happens, but usually it's wishful thinking. So, one thing I wanted to talk about was timing, and my experience over time is we've all made bad hires, and I'm going to get to the long-term employee in a second because that's often the really tricky one. But we've all made bad hires, and my general observation is when you know you've made a bad hire, don't delay, don't prolong, deal with it early on.
Get it annulled.
Yeah, nip it in the bud. And I'm a fan of sometimes how can I be a fan of this? But it's weird things like probationary periods. It's like, yeah, I asked the client, you call me up, I say, and they say, I don't know, I don't know how this one slipped through the net, but it's day one. I mean, they showed up and it's just not good. And I'll say, oh, well, in your handbook, do you have a probationary period? And somebody's like, I think we do. I'm not sure.
We don't have a handbook?
But if you do, a couple of points. It's not, by the way, it's not a complete safe harbor. So just because you let someone go in their probationary period doesn't mean they can't sue you. Some people say employment at will, we let them go, probationary period, we're good. Yeah, not quite as simple as that. They still have all the same rights, but the bar is lower. It's not like, oh, you've got to go through all the progressive discipline, the performance management. You can, if you have a pretty well put together probationary period policy, it says, look, you need to meet expectations and sustain those expectations. And if we reach the conclusion during a probationary period, you're not, we're not going to keep you, basically. Paraphrase that can be a little better worded, but that's what it is. And so I'm always saying to a client, if they're in their probationary period, you're not going to be rash, but you have more of a leash right now. And the problem, yes, right here.
I think maybe you just kind of started to answer this, but what is the difference between a probationary period and just utilizing the employee at will
Yeah, so the question, just so everyone can hear, what's the difference between using a probationary period and utilizing the employment at will? The probationary period will have a defined 60, 90, 6 months. For teachers in Maine is 2 years, it's a big range. But during that period, they're an employee at will, as they are afterwards. But once they've got through their probationary period and, they are your employee, I think at that point, even though they're an employee at will, there's a greater expectation that your other policies, like a progressive discipline policy, like using a performance improvement plan, all of those things that may be in your handbook are going to kick in. The fallacy about employment at will at any point during your employment is when that concept was first adopted, and for those of you who aren't familiar, it's like, if you're in a state like Maine, employment at will means you can let someone go or they can leave at any time for any reason, except for illegal reasons. And I would spend the next 20 minutes telling you the illegal reasons. So the employment at will doctrine has been massively diluted by legislation over the years because employees have been vested appropriately with a whole bunch of rights. Some may say too many rights, but that's for debate. But I will get clients who call me up and say, and sometimes the HR person is not being heard by the CEO. So the CEO will get on the call as well and say, but we're an employment at will state.
Every time.
And I was like, yeah, absolutely. But if the person has a disability and they can claim that they were let go because of their disability, because you didn't want to give them more leave, then you may have a claim. So I just see the probationary period as, that initial period where you have more leeway to act quickly and decisively if it's not working out. Now, that's a judgment call, but I don't think this is cynical, but if you see some problems early, and you look at them and say, this is really going to drag us down, then it may be good to act decisively and quickly. Because the longer you have the issue, the longer it festers, the more issues.
Can I just add a quick?
Yeah.
Thinking about it this way, in the probationary period, they have to prove they can do the job. After the probationary period, they kind of have to prove they can't do the job.
Yeah.
So while it's still a performance issue, performance is not assumed in the probationary period.
Yeah, no, that's a very good way of describing it. So those not easy, but here's the real issue that I think many of you either have experienced or might experience. You've got someone who's been with you a long time. Could be, family business, could be a family member. And, they are having an impact. And sometimes it's less about, they're not great at their job. Now, I know in some businesses, there's some degree of tolerance for that. But it's the one who attitudinally is, people don't want to deal with them. Some people are even scared of the person. The person is, combative, can be aggressive, difficult, gets avoided. The word toxic comes up. Sometimes they're equal opportunity. They're lashing out at everybody. And I'm like, gosh, this person has been here for all of these years and they're viewed as, maybe untouchable isn't quite the right word, but what I get the sense often is like, I just don't see how we can move forward. I don't know, he, she, they have always been like this. And I guess, they'll retire at some point. They're like, yeah, they're 63 and hopefully they'll go at 65 or maybe they're going to stay till 67. And so here's kind of how I deal with that conversation. And I say, all right, so it sounds to me that we're at this point where you don't see light at the end of the tunnel. You don't see accountability. You don't see. So, one of your options here is to let this person go, to terminate their employment. And, my job would be to help you do that in the most, if possible, respectful, dignified way that manages the risk. And I totally, with transparency, say, if you're letting someone go and they've worked with you for a long, long time, it's the optics and it's the loyalty and all those issues that come into play. Just because I worked somewhere 25 years doesn't give me superior employment rights under law. Doesn't give me any superior rights. But in the eyes of, can you imagine a jury, they're listening and they're saying, gosh, my dad worked for UPS and then he, after 27 years, they just ditched him. And then, that person has a bias, an understandable one. So they're going to look at, someone who's got that very long service, and then you've had to let them go in a similar manner. So, I teed up the problem, but how do you deal with it? I always want to explore with you, is there a means of getting this person, encouraging this person, supporting them to resign? I always think that should be part of a conversation, because, just to sit a person down, and I've had many situations like this where the person feels completely blindsided. No one has dared say anything, and then they finally plucked up the courage. Usually they call me on a Friday afternoon and they want to do it that day. Like they've been putting it off forever and ever. It's like, enough is enough is enough is enough. I was like, all right, slow down a little bit. I get your urgency, I get your desire, but you got to be thoughtful and strategic about it. So have you had a conversation with the person about, the future, what you're seeing, and, what are the issues? And, as I said, resignation, affording the person some time. So if you're in a position, and this is a conversation I have so many times, like, are you going to terminate their employment and literally they leave that day? And people will say, yeah, I'm worried what they might do. I'm worried about this and that or the other. Like, okay, fair enough. But consider how that will look and that will feel, particularly for the long service employee. Like, I came to work one day, I've been doing the same thing forever. Maybe I've had a sense it's not going great. Haven't got a lot of feedback. Had to go into that conference room, met with that HR person, and she had someone else with her that day. That didn't look good.
It's never good.
That's never good. There's two of them. And yeah, the manager couldn't even say a word or look at me. And all I heard was I was fired. And then they asked me to go back to my desk. In fact, they went back with me and they asked me to leave the building. And that's not going to end well in many situations, but that person's going to feel a huge sense of injustice, unfairness, even if they've been an employee from hell, which they may have been, but that, doesn't, yes.
There a certain aspect of resignation that also is risk mitigation from the employer's perspective? I see nodding of heads relative to avoiding settlement negotiation and ultimately the end game of litigation.
Yeah. It's so I always have this conversation, which is you can say to a person, look, okay, Dave, it's
We're about to have a hard conversation. Dave.
yeah, it's tough.
It's gonna be great though.
It's not been going well. And what I wanted to explore with you. And so if you do explore it and you say, one option, just laying it out now, and I want you to think about it. I'm not looking for your decision like today, but would be, can we work out a way that you would resign? And that's your decision, because I've had the 5 out there. There's no way I'm going to do you a dirty, but you need to fire me if you're going to fire me. I'm not going to make it easier for you. But if you have a way and you say, let's think about it, because everybody, we all have our self-respect and our dignity. And the person who's been with you a long time and you're gonna have to exit them, they still, and they're employed from hell, they still want to be respected. And to the degree that they are able to help craft the message, which is, I decided to move on to other endeavors. That's a.
New
but-
opportunities.
But you can script it, the person can say, it's been thinking about it for a while, I'm gonna do something different. And they're not like packing their bags that day, because if they give that message and they pack their bags that day, you're all gonna say, that's just BS, The person who disappears overnight and then, oh, they resigned? It doesn't fly. So it's like, Dave, how about, for the next several weeks, you work from home a little bit more, you wrap up some projects, we agree on a message, that we'd share with your team. You have feedback into it, we want feedback into it. And, it would be great if you want one to have a small party. That would be terrific. And you're looking at me like, oh my God, it's gonna be hell. But you're gonna be the gauge of whether that's feasible.
Absolutely,
And you're not gonna do it in some situations where the person is like thrown his badge across the table at you. Unless they, yes, question.
So from an HR perspective, though, I think we've all heard many times that the dangers in doing something like that is, and maybe this comes with evaluating the employee ahead of time, decide if you want to make this offer, but the employee during those 2 weeks or whatever we've given them could decide, oh, I'm gonna share with my closest friend of the office what's really going on here, or spreading stuff that way, or something happens and they feel vindictive and I'm going to seek a disability, so they can't let me, seek a disability claim, or say they're firing me now, or thinking this reason, things like that.
Yeah, I always have that conversation and I say to somebody, eyes wide open, if you're gonna give that period of grace, these are the benefits. If you believe that it's gonna be hell and they're gonna go bad mouth and they're gonna do this and, if you make that judgment, and that has happened, then you may not want that period of grace. It's gonna be a judgment call. I have counseled, advised clients on hundreds and hundreds of these situations, probably more than that. And I've very rarely seen the person who takes that period and then fabricates a claim. I really haven't. But it does come down to, do they feel, there's some degree of trust still, and it's a hard one to gauge. But, it's a very fair, valid point. I always say as well this, I say, you can have a conversation with someone and say, look, I think it would be ideal if we can have a transition period. My expectations are during that period the following. And do you think you can meet those? They may say yes, but they want the paycheck. But if they're not, and you can even say it up front, we might have to end it earlier. And, 2 weeks in and you said 4 weeks, it's hell. You say, hey, why don't you just, take the next 2 weeks, I'm giving away your money now, and essentially be on like an administrative leave. You don't have to work for the rest of those 2 weeks. Your employment will end at the same time. So you have some leeway. You haven't I've promised this person that they can work for this period of time. Yes.
So someone on Zoom asked, if you're considering to severance a long-term employee, is a general rule of thumb to provide 1 week of severance for each year of tenure?
So yesterday I got that very question.
Get it every time.
Somebody who 27 years in, and they generally have provided 1 week. And the question was, well, would we give 27 weeks? It's going to be a lot for this small business. Number one depends do any of you have actually a severance policy? Like you have it in writing? Most folks don't.
Don't.
So, I'm not gonna get into all the legal ins and outs, but it gives you a little bit more flexibility. You generally should be consistent. You hear that from us the whole time. So if you've had a practice of doing 1 week per year, then it's good to be consistent with that. Some people provide a cap and say it'll be up to 16 weeks, 18 weeks, 10 weeks. It's all what you can, afford as a business. So I'll frequently get that question. Well, all right, I get it, Peter. It makes sense. Because, if you give somebody severance, what you can get in return is an agreement.
Yes.
And the agreement says, you're not going to sue us. That's what you get in return. And there's a way to do it. And there's, unfortunately, if you've ever consulted with a lawyer and you get back the severance agreement, you're like, oh my God, do we have to say this? Do we have to tell them that they should go and see a lawyer? Yes. Do we have to give them 21 days because they're over 40? Yes. There's a whole series of bells and whistles that are not in there because we think they're a good idea. They're in there because you want that document to be enforced and bulletproof in some ways. So, but anyway, I digress. Yes, figure out how much, and if you do it ridiculously low, then, the person is gonna depending on their needs, but.
Take my chances.
Yeah, I may take my chances. So what will happen, just so I'm clear, and this is sort of a red flag moment for all of you. If you are jumping ahead for a second, if you have had to let somebody go, or even if they've resigned, but they haven't signed an agreement with you, if you ever get that letter from them or from a lawyer that says, I want my personnel file and I want my reasons. Have anyone had that for any employee?
Oh, I love it. I'm gonna give you a statement of reasons. I papered my file, I documented it well. I would be pleased to give you a statement of reasons.
So that's what they're entitled to under Maine law. And it is nearly always a precursor. If you get that, that's not a little tiny red flag. That's a big giant one waving that you then, if you haven't talked to somebody with expertise like an employment lawyer, HR person, that's the time you should, because a lawyer has taken a look at this and said, you know what, get your file and see what they say for the reasons that they were let go. And then I'll consider whether I'll have you sign an agreement, and I'll take a third of everything and we'll go after them.
That letter is the first opportunity to shut the claim down.
So there's always, I'm not going to digress yet. I will in a minute. Oh, no, we don't have time. We don't have time for my second digression.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just going to say one other thing about, the most practical advice I can give you. When you reach the point that you're going to say, we're going to have to let this person go, I just mentioned in the letter, the reasons for your termination. And even if they resign, but you would have terminated, the reasons you want to understand them, you want to have them documented, and you want everybody who's going to interact with that employee singing the same tune. There's got to be consistency around that. It doesn't have to be an enormously long, detailed explanation necessarily. It obviously has to be true. It has to be authentic. And it's the script you're going to stick to. You're absolutely going to stick to, because both of us as lawyers have seen, if you ever get a claim and the reason just shifts slightly at unemployment versus the termination, or in the termination letter, or later in a deposition, that's what lawyers exploit who are suing you to say, well, it must be a false reason because they keep adding to it and they keep changing it. And obviously it wasn't strong enough before because now they said this and the other. So I'm a huge believer, and that's a big part of the conversation is, all right, what is the reason? We're going to develop that script. Those are going to be the talking points for your conversation. Stick to those. Don't get into a debate. Don't get into a fight. Don't get into an argument. Keep it really high level, and never, ever, ever tell someone, I'm not going to tell you the reason.
Oh, yeah,
And, but no, that has plainly happened because I get that question as well. It's the same CEO who says they're at will, says, well, we don't have to give them a reason. Peter, where in the law does it say we have to give them a reason? I said, well, it does if they ask for it later in writing, but it looks terrible. It's like firing somebody by text, which I had recently.
let me introduce you to F&B world.
So, you know, but that and I always say to client, if you put down your reasons and you look at those reasons and you're like, there's a message for you that maybe you're not right already or it's the time. But if you can look at those reasons, you can stand by those reasons, you can repeat those reasons, everybody on the same page. It's one of the most important things that will happen. You'll get a call from unemployment. And often you may just say, I have no problem with the person getting unemployment. That's the
Yeah.
least of your problems. But you may get a call from unemployment. And if you say in unemployment, oh yeah, and actually they also stole from us. It's like, that was never, ever stated before. You're gonna create problems yourself. So consistency is, yes.
I have a question because we're in the F&B space. So
I got you.
our threshold is, you know, litigious, yes, we're always concerned, but it's more just unemployment rate. And because
Yes.
there's much higher turnover, which can impact us greatly. So on the unemployment side of things, you know, we want to avoid termination because this cards are stacked against us in that hearing every time, especially in this state, at least in our experience, because we're in multiple states.
Yeah,
And so
especially in this state.
yes. And so, you know, any thoughts or feedback about, you know, take the same approach. We've got a lot out of this, but at the same time, we have high turnover.
You're going to, yeah.
We're going to, and so we're kind of between a rock and a hard place because termination seems difficult for us to navigate, where we feel this person needs to be terminated, we have all the information, but going down that road, not likely that we're gonna win often. What would you say to a group like us or in the F&B space navigating everything you've said today? Thoughts just broadly on, you know, we're in a different space.
Yeah, everyone's dealing in text messages and you're reading an angry message from your chef and you're
Yeah.
like, I needed this phone call, not, yeah.
Yeah.
Your documentation is really important, even if it is texts.
Yeah.
I tell my folks, like, would I love a beautiful like piece of paper that outlines everything? Of course. But if you need to voice note it or email it to yourself, you got to keep track of it and it has to be documented to the employee. When they are let go, exactly why, and it's gotta be tied to, you've gotta have a good handbook, like definitely my hospitality clients have to have, I mean, everyone has to have a good handbook, but like especially in hospitality, because your issues are probably timeliness, calling out, like, you know, call no show. Whatever your practice is becomes your policy. So for you, the best thing is, yes, you're gonna document it, but you've really gotta train your management.
Yeah.
And you've got to manage, the biggest issue I see is like people, especially like chefs are tempestuous. You don't want to let a chef go. But if they're not adequately managing the team and you're getting a ton of unemployment claims because they're not taking the time to say, hey, you got here 10 minutes
Yeah.
late, then the chef is the problem, not the front lines. I'm using that as an example in the food and beverage space. But and that brings me to my last thought before we kick it back to Catherine, something that Peter said. We get so focused on our problem employees, and this ties in, that we forget we have an entire other team we're managing. We are so worried about this person suing us and bending over backwards and getting them not to throw that, what is it, Empire Records or, no, it's not that, but in the movie, F you, you're cool. We don't want that, right? But the fact is everyone else is watching, right? Everyone else is watching that dishwasher come in late every time or picking up that shift because they didn't show up at all. And everybody's watching that toxic employee just allowed to continue. And so sometimes we're not just considering that employee, we're also considering what the rest of the team is seeing. I know Catherine has to do something. I will stick around. I'm here. I will stick around. I'm gonna leave at like 11, but I'll stick around for questions. But I know that she is very hot to give out some prizes. And I just wanted to remind you all, you have the survey. Those of you that are on Zoom, if you check the chat box, there is a survey. Please, 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 they're so helpful in making sure we're giving good content and that Peter and I are hitting it and that The Institute's giving you what you want, so please, please, please do your best. But Catherine has some goodies to give away.
Thank you. Thank you both very, very much. It's always entertaining to have you here. Teagan, thank you. So we bribe you a little bit with door prizes if you stay and
Incentivize.
incentivize, yes, with our survey. So you've got those on the table. If you haven't given us a business card, you can take your name tag and fold it in half. And so I'll come around and grab those.